All right, class, here's our Chapter 2 for our Government 2305 Federal Government. Just continuing on, and we're almost done with it, so this slide should be a little, this video ought to be a little bit shorter than the others. So we're still talking about procedural versus substantive democracy and what exactly does democracy, particularly in the United States, look like. But remember, this could also apply to other countries that claim to have some form of democratic model. So institutional mechanisms required. Well, think about this. You've got to have a way to elect your leaders. So we do this in the United States, and most countries do this through some form of election. The different countries have different rules. In fact, in the United States, many of the elections are governed actually by the states rather than the federal government. Political parties. The United States is unique in the fact that we have two major political parties. You go to England, you've got dozens of them. Finland has like 20 political parties in their parliament. The United States is not a parliamentary system, but some countries are, and that would fall within this political party sort of situation. Legislatures. Again, they can go by different names. The United States, we've got the Congress, the House of Representatives. And again, in England and Finland and other places, you've got parliamentary systems. In fact, parliamentary legislatures are far more common in the world than what we have. And then interest groups plays a major role in this also. Now, interest groups gets kind of a lot of bad press in the United States because they are viewed as throwing money around, getting their way because of the money. But interest groups also are sometimes called special interest groups, also have a way of representing you through a pluralist sort of system. I'm one voice, but my view on some issue, be it the Second Amendment, be it free speech, maybe it has something to do with pro-choice or pro-life, maybe, think about AARP. It's one of the largest interest groups out there. It represents people over the age of 55. And so what you do is, by your membership in that and the dues that you pay into that, it is a way to get your voice out. It's sort of a collective, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. It's sort of a collective voice by all the members together. And so this is an institutional mechanism that has a lot to do with the way democracy, not only in our country but other countries, sort of works. Now, the two models of democracy, we've kind of dealt with this before. The majoritarian model values participation by the people in general, and this relies very much upon elections and the vote. The pluralist model values participation by people in groups, and again, this is where political parties has a role in that, legislatures has a role in that, interest groups really does. And so again, there's our two models of democracy, and that's sort of at the heart of this particular chapter. All right, so the majoritarian model of democracy, let's get a little bit deeper. The government by the majority of the people is sort of where we deal with this. The majority rules, you've heard that said before, is very much a majoritarian principle. Popular elections of government officials gives your and my voice as to who will elect us. Now, I may vote against this representative, or I may vote against the senator that gets elected. I may vote against a person that gets elected to be president. It doesn't mean that my voice is not heard. It's still there. It's just I am not in the majority or the largest number of votes, for example. Elections decide government policies, and there are three ways that I will go ahead and mention here that you and I have a role well, it depends on really on where you are. Texas does not have all of these in place, although some large Texas cities might. Some states have something called a referendum. Referendum is think of it like a vote to ask the opinion of the people. It's not always binding, but maybe a political party or maybe the government in general may put out a question. Do you favor the lowering the speed limit to 55 miles per hour in your state? Well, some say yes, some say no, and they take that and they make decisions off of it. So I think that's a good way to look at a referendum. Initiative is a way to introduce a law or introduce a bill or a resolution, and then it's voted on by the government. the legislature. Sometimes it's passed down through a referendum, or sometimes it's passed down to a vote to you and I. And recall is a way by which to remove an official that does not doing the job that they said they would do, or they are corrupt. In fact, there was a recall attempt, I think it was just a few years ago, I think Wisconsin. There was a recall attempt when I was younger. I can remember there was a governor in the state of California. His name was Gray Davis. He got recalled, and Arnold Schwarzenegger got elected to replace him. Yes, the actor. So but that's what a recall is. Think of it like a recall on your car. You've got a seatbelt broken. It's happening on many vehicles, so we're gonna fix it. Well, this is a recall of politicians. Now, again, Texas does not have most of these. I know they don't have initiative. They don't have recall. We do see political parties sometimes put out referendums, but initiative and recall are in some of the larger cities. For example, I think Dallas has a form of initiative and a form of recall, if I'm not mistaken. Now, the critics of this particular model, one of the major criticisms is that Americans are not knowledgeable enough typically to really understand all the concepts for the vote to be based upon a vote every 2 years, or a vote in the case of president every 4 years. Defenders basically say it's a chance for you and I to express our opinions. We have coherent opinions, and it puts a bit more faith that you and I are going to research what we need to research, and therefore that knowledge is reflected in the votes that we cast. All right. Now, what about pluralist democracy? Governments by the people, operating through competing interest groups. Again, the National Rifle Association, Second Amendment Interest Group. AARP, Association of, AARP be the American Association of Retired Persons. Huge interest group. The United States Chamber of Commerce represents businesses. These are all interest groups. So when government is sort of shaped through those interest groups and the opinions of its members, this is pluralist democracy. It's a shift from mass electorate to more organized groups, but it is a way by which to get the voice of many people out there. And so because there's power in numbers, and that's the power behind a pluralist democracy. There's two major mechanisms. Again, we've mentioned interest groups and decentralized government. Decentralized government is also pretty important. Now, one example of decentralized government in our case would be, think about how some decisions are made at the state level, some are made at the national level. Think about how there are 2 senators for every state. In Texas, there are 34 representatives. Some states have more, most of them have less. That's decentralized. In the case of the federal government, we have a bureaucracy. We've got the Department of Justice, and we've got the Department of Energy, the Department of Health and Human Services, Homeland Security. All of these agencies have a bureaucracy, a rulemaking body. That's decentralized, and so it gives an opportunity for these interest groups and these special interests, these groups, to sort of get the word out there and to win support in the halls of government where decisions are getting made. Now, Robert Dahl is the founder of this idea of pluralist democracy. Now, it's been around, but he gives it a name. And he basically says that competition of groups, even if those groups are unequal, are a major sort of shaping of what we're talking about here. And so read a little bit more on Robert Dahl. Again, pretty big name in political science. All right. Now, majoritarian versus pluralist. A little bit of a review. Majoritarian. Mass public controls the government, again through the vote. It relies upon majority rule. We talked about that. Cohesive political parties. In the United States, there are 2 major parties and a handful of third parties that usually don't get elected, but they do shape the ideas of what's going on at any given time. And the majoritarian also relies more on a centralized government and elected government outside of the scope of bureaucracy. Okay. Now, pluralist relies on interest groups, specialized groups that focus on one issue or 2 issues, one issue mainly. It limits majority action. again, the idea of who gets the most votes is often not as relevant as who has the power to get these opinions or these issues presented to those in a position of power. And again, decentralized government is what makes pluralist possible as well. Now, what about the elite theory? Hadn't talked about this. It's not a huge issue that we're going to get into much. But under elite theory, does this happen in the United States? A small group makes the most important decisions. Well, if you say, well, we've got 100 senators and they make all these decisions for us, you might could cast that opinion out there, and you might be able to get some supporters of that opinion. Government is controlled by the wealthy and business connections. There are some countries that really are blatantly this way. Under the elite theory, we see control of key financial, communications, industrial, government institutions, again, within the hands of a small group of very important, usually wealthy individuals. And they would call the United States an oligarchy if you support this elite theory. And again, you can look back to earlier in this presentation, what exactly does oligarchy mean? But it's not real easy to test this theory. How valid is this? It looks on the surface to have a lot of validity. But how much power do the figures behind the scenes really have? And again, this is something that can be debated, but it's very, very difficult to prove one way or the other. But it's good to know what is meant by elite theory. Okay, all right. So elite versus pluralist. Again, remember, pluralist involves money, usually by special interest. Pluralists believe in a struggle between competing interests. Again, pro-life, pro-choice. Gun control, pro-Second Amendment. There's competition there. Wealthy have an advantage in both of these struggles because, again, it's oftentimes the wealthy that have the time and the money and the power, the wealth and money on their hands that can actually lead these groups. I'm on my paycheck, I cannot quit my job and go off and become a major leader of some interest group that maybe I have an interest in being a part of. It justifies disparities amongst segments of society as well. So again, here we have these three different theories. Be sure you're reading up on it. There's some examples in the book that I'm just not really going to have time to go over. All right. What about democracies around the world? Now, when I was first starting out my teaching career, the Iraq War was going on. I began teaching in 2001. In fact, I'd been teaching less than a month before 9/11 happened. And then we saw wars in Iraq and wars in Afghanistan and attempts for democracies to sort of rise out of the ashes of those countries. And then in 2008, 2009 or so, we had the Arab Spring. So throughout time, there have been the attempt to establish democracies. The United States has an advantage in the fact that we sort of developed it on our own over a very, very long period of time. It wasn't really forced on us. It was something we chose on our own. Governments often meet some criteria, but not others. And this is often what causes these rising democracies to sort of come tumbling down. There's been a slight decline in the number of democracies in the world in recent years. And then other times we've seen attempts. These countries last a few years, qualified as a democracy, and then they're not able to hold on to it. It devolves into war, or one warlord takes over, for example, and displaces the government that had started out with some democratic tendencies. Okay, you look at the Middle East, particularly in Afghanistan, they're more of a theocracy. I mean, you've got the Shahs and the Mullahs and various other groups that are religious leaders that sort of are calling the shots. That's not democracy. Okay? All right. So we're running out of time, so I'm going to stop here. But what is America? Are we more pluralist than majoritarian? I think probably that's true. Principal drawback of pluralism is it favors the well-organized, so affluent receive more benefits. Because I'm not affluent, I have to work. Again, we've already said that. Recently, parties are more sharply divided, making the U.S. system more majoritarian. And the people's trust in the American government has fallen in the past years as well. And so Does my vote really count? Have you ever heard that statement before? So we're somewhere in the middle. We have elements of both, and so you can make your own opinion of exactly where we are. All right, that got us through the second half of this particular chapter. I hope it has been helpful. Reach out to me with comments, questions, and concerns through email. That's the best way, and have a good day.